Hey guys, welcome back to the Up and Up podcast. This is episode 3, but somehow the numbering got kind of messed up. So some of you may think that this is episode 2, but it's actually episode 3 uh, officially. And yeah, Josh is going to introduce our first topic for the day.
First things first, as we mentioned last episode, we're all digital now since Kyle has gone back to Ottawa. So audio setup might be a bit weird until we figure some kinks out and get everything straightened up. But our topic today, first we're gonna give a little early birthday celebration to our very own Kyle here, whose birthday is tomorrow. So yeah, happy birthday.
Thanks, guys.
Which leads us into our topic of growing old. Uh,
Yeah.
27 isn't really old, but let's see how we feel about it. Yeah.
Okay. I I literally just had this conversation with Grace like 10 minutes before the podcast
hmm
started, but I consider 27 to be late 20s
Yeah.
because if you go by like just the division of threes, like okay, personally I consider if you're age 20, then you're 20. You're not like quote unquote in your 20s yet. Or like I guess you could consider it early 20s, but I would always say if you're 20, you're 20. And then 21, 22, 23 is like your early 20s. 24, 25, 26 is your mid 20s, and then 27, 28, 29 is your late 20s, and then you hit 30, right?
Okay. Fair enough.
So I've always thought of 27 as being like the beginning of the end for my 20s. So tomorrow, I guess that'll be me old.
The beginning of the end.
Yeah. The beginning of the end of my 20s.
Mhm.
Yeah. Not yeah, not
What
the,
end?
not the beginning of the end in general, but yeah, the beginning of the end of my 20s. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like in terms of getting old though, I've always felt old, I guess, because my birthday is really early in the year,
Mm,
and a lot of my friends had birthdays later in the year, or like specifically, I guess growing up, you measure a lot of things by the school year, right? So like
true.
my birthday was always before the school year ended, and a lot of my friends had birthdays after the school year ended. So I was always like quote unquote 1 year older than them because I wouldn't see them like until quote unquote next year, and that's when they would later turn the same age that I had already turned. So when I was growing up, I always kind of felt, at least about a year older than all my friends, which for me is like a really weird experience. I don't know.
Did you
I
find yourself like hanging out with the people a grade older in like elementary or high
No,
school? No.
no, not at all. I still hung out with like everyone who was in my same grade, but it was weird because like I felt like yeah, we were in the same grade, so like we were peers and we were friends, but I did always feel like I was, older than everyone else, or like the oldest one in my friend group. And even still today, right? Like in our friend group, there's only really like one person who's older than me, right? So I still feel
Do you
aged.
do you feel you guys don't have siblings, but do you
No.
feel that by being older, you kind of have like more pressure put on you, maybe to make some decisions earlier than other people because life hits you first, or anything like that, or
Yeah, kind
don't
of.
have any kind of those
I mean, like,
pressures?
my parents are getting pretty old. Right? I think they're around like 60 now, getting there. So,
Hmm.
like, when they retire, like, I'm, I wouldn't say expected, but like for me, like, I feel like I gotta help, take care of them at that point, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still not like in my career yet, right?
Mm.
Yeah. I
So I do feel like a bit of pressure, but I think we'll see how things
I'm
go.
asking, or I'm thinking the perspective as an older sibling, especially here, or get to know about this perspective more from staff who, while we're the same age, I think I definitely we definitely have different views on things. That's how people grow, but um, she definitely feels, and me to a degree as well. How since you have younger siblings, you kind of the pathfinder, the kind of pioneer in uh,
Mm,
moving out in job and relationship and education and all these kinds of fields that I was kind of wondering, yeah, right now, especially, as time goes on, ages or the age difference between people is less meaningful. Uh, I think, especially as you hit that early 20s, that kind of almost goes away.
yeah,
Sure, in my mid 20s, I definitely see some disconnects with people in their early 20s, for example, but there's most things I do connect with them. There's just the little small things, and I guess growing up, you get those big decisions you're
yeah,
first, and then other people can either follow your lead or see how use your experience to navigate their decisions.
yeah. I mean, I guess going back to what you were saying a little bit at the start
Mhm.
of this like this small topic. For me, like yeah, as an only child, I never really felt that, and even like again amongst like my friends, even though I felt like a year older, I didn't feel like there was anything that kind of I was experiencing, any earlier in particular than anyone
Mm,
else. I guess like okay, the only thing I suppose is like I got my driver's license right when I turned 16,
yeah,
so that like came a lot earlier than a lot of other people, right?
be the group chaperone. Chauffeur.
No, I didn't have a car to drive. I just got my license, so
We know
it
who
was
the
like,
group chaperone was.
oh yeah, the Uber driver. Yeah, the main man. But yeah, no, like I didn't really feel like I experienced anything earlier, or I had to like,
Hmm.
explore anything that my friends weren't really going through at the same time. Because again, like even though there was that feeling of like, oh yeah, Kyle's like old, he's the old man of the group. Like we're still all realistically the same age, right? We're
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the same year. So no, I never really felt that. And then I was also like the youngest of my cousins within kind of all the same age range, right?
Yeah.
So my next cousin, who's younger than me, was born in '99. So like he's kind of close, but there is like a 3 year gap there. And then my next cousins after that, I think were born in 2003, 2002.
Mm.
So like there's a
Very
fairly
far.
big gap, yeah, there. But the cousin who's just above me was only 6 months older than me, right? And so they were born technically the year before me, but really was only 6 months. So we were always like really close in age. And I think that that's like also where I felt, um, having an early birthday and kind of being older. It brought me a little bit closer to all my cousins that were older than me because I didn't feel like there was as big of a gap between me and the next eldest cousin because
Mm.
again it was only like 6 months. So in that regard, it was like yeah, maybe amongst my friends, we all kind of felt the same age, but with my cousins, I definitely felt like, yeah, I kind of belong to the older group because I'm born so early in the year.
Mm. Since since I'm a late uh, birthday,
Yeah,
I have a
Same.
very, quite the opposite. Yeah, Josh. I don't know about you, Josh, but I have definitely the opposite experience where I felt I felt young. Everyone's always a year older than me, almost, right? On the other side of that coin, uh,
yeah,
where you start this new year, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm 13." It's like, "Oh, still 12 until winter break's about to round the corner." Um, Start uni, everyone's 18, I'm 17. At the end of the first year, they're all drinking. It's like, gonna have to wait till second year for that uh, kind of thing. The small things, when age is still an important value. To me, it's until about 19 because I don't really care about drinking in the States. So it's never held me back to go up to 21. But
yeah,
until 19, you still have yearly limitations, right? 16 driving, 18 voting, 19 drinking, and all that stuff. So
mhm,
it was it did feel like I was, because most of the years already gone by. Most of my friends have already had their birthday. It's uh, I'm lacking behind. I'm kind of failing. Like there's one party that I missed, not only but also in part 'cause I was the only one that wasn't 18. So they went to the casino, but I wasn't able to join in part for that. Yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Josh. If you had a similar experience as well, or
Um,
not
yeah,
really?
I mean, like for me, like it's always been like I wouldn't say like I felt younger than people like born the same year, but like
Mhm.
it was just like the like you said, like the number limiting me to
Mm,
like activities, right? It's not that like I really wanted to go out and drink or like I really wanted to go like to a casino or anything, but it's just like everyone else can and I'm missing
yeah.
out because I actually can't do anything about it,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Hmm. That is, yeah, I guess that's interesting. That's something that I would never have even thought about, right? Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I that experience is like so far removed from
Yeah,
my
just people,
experience
because
that
yeah.
yeah, that's like very very interesting. Like I don't know, I don't think there were any instances where like I would go out and try and do something though and like my friends couldn't do it because I feel like because okay, honestly a lot of our friends have birthdays later in the year
Mm,
and like I'm one of the only ones who had a birthday early in the year. So I feel like I just like didn't try and do those things until like everyone was kind of able to because
Yeah.
it just was like just me and then
yeah.
like the next birthday is in like what
April,
the
yeah.
summertime, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
so I feel like it's just it never really occurred to me to have done
Mhm.
things like that. Um, but something that you said kind of a little bit earlier started that like just I don't know, it's like trigger memory in me
What?
of something else that I was talking about. So you were like, oh yeah, like have to wait until like almost winter break by the time it's your birthday.
Mhm.
And one of the like weirdest things for me is like knowing people who are born like really super late in the year, right?
Yeah.
Like after Christmas, because I know that like even though technically we would be born in the same year, in like less than a month, I will be a year older than them. And like the passage of time in that regard is like so freaky to think that like yeah, it's literally like 11 full months between us, like almost a full year, and yet because we're in the same like year, we're
Mm.
considered the same age, you know?
Well, you have to draw the line somewhere, but I know that I knew someone that was, born on one of the last few days of the year, and
Yeah.
they were in my grade, but they were 95.
Oh,
Um,
really?
but just dragging back 3 days, and the
Yeah.
first born person in my year was the next day, like January 2nd or
Yeah.
something. So it's like the biological differences between those 5 days is going to be nothing compared to him, and the first person in his year would have been a year.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think that I didn't hang out with him too much, but I had these high school projects with him and whatnot. And he was kind of in between almost. I can't speak from his perspective, but from outside perspective looking at him, he hung out with people the grade above and
Mhm.
our grade. Because,
Mm.
probably for extracurricular activities, he'd be the year older.
Yeah.
So, there's kind of pros and cons to, if you're the last week of December, kind of making that decision. It's probably a tougher decision for a parent. Um, I feel like right now I would just keep them in their year. But I also
Yeah.
know that for athletes, a lot of, yeah, I'm pulling this source straight out, middle of nowhere. I have read it somewhere a long time ago. So I'm pretty certain it's, but stay with me, where a lot of pro athletes are typically pulled from birthdays earlier in the year, the first half of the year compared to the second half, because
Mm.
those people have in puberty soon, that they're grown faster. So when child day comes, it's typically not the last day of the year, and then
Yeah.
those people are ahead. Especially on trials or things where you're competing with people only in your year instead of
Yes.
an age range or whatever. Then I believe that pro athletes typically are born in the first half of the year.
I definitely have heard that somewhere or have read that somewhere.
Yeah.
That does make a lot of sense. Guys, why am I not a pro athlete?
I was about to say that's the
Yeah,
only
I
thing
know.
stopping me.
That's the only thing stopping you.
That is far from the only thing stopping me.
No, but we're gonna live longer.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's
Wait,
true. You know?
wait, what do athletes like die younger?
No, remember we were talking about this like a few months ago, how short people are gonna dominate the world because like on average they live longer.
Didn't you
No.
bring it up during dinner or something?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
No.
One of our other friends, one of
Oh.
our other friends brought it up.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll remind you guys of the conversation
Okay.
later. It was at dinner like
Yeah, I
a
think I
few
remember.
months ago. Yeah.
A little too far off topic. But you said 27 around the corner.
Yeah.
So did you make a 5-year plan at 22? Did you?
Yes, actually I did.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I guess I must have. 22. Is that the last time I made a 5-year plan? I was in fourth year university. So
you're
that would
probably
have been
21 or
in
22. Yeah.
2018.
That'd be
So
22.
that, yeah, so this is the fifth year of that
So
5-year plan.
you remember any of the key highlights?
Fuck no. I remember like very vaguely. This was okay, and this is like the deep lore. That was one of the first conversations I ever had with Grace when we were like still friends, before we started dating. I was like, "Oh yeah, like what's your 5-year plan?" Horrible thing to ask. Just like don't ever ask a fourth year university student, like a fellow fourth year university
Really, I
student
think
that.
it's okay. Continue. I think it's good though. But
I mean, like I had a
yeah,
5-year plan, but like if you ask someone who doesn't have a 5-year plan,
yeah.
that is like the most asshole thing you can possibly ask them.
Really,
It's
I
like,
think it's such a great conversation starter because if someone asked me that at the end, I'd be like, I have no idea.
yeah,
But
but
then you can start shooting some questions. Be like, especially if you have one, you're like, oh, you're like, you pull something soft from your list. You're like, kind of hoping to move out of the house, and then the person will hit you same, and then you build off of there. But
yes, but I feel like it puts a lot of pressure on you if you don't have
oh,
something like
totally.
that.
Yeah, it
And
depends
someone
situation.
has like an entire I have my whole 5-year plan like laid out
Yeah,
already.
that's true. That's
I mean,
true.
like honestly, of the like few things I remember, no, my life has not gone to that plan, and like the pandemic was a big part of that. I'm sure, amongst other things,
Of course.
but yeah, I guess turning 27, maybe time to make a new 5-year plan. Good God, that's
Anything
terrifying.
spring to mind? You're
That
like,
would bring me into my 30s, 32. Um, I think, I mean, like, I guess I don't know, not to drop a bomb or anything, but I think Grace and I will probably be married by then. That's something we're thinking about within the next, definitely within the next 3 or so years. Um, I don't know, maybe thinking about having kids sometime. That's like wild to think, but within 5 years, it'll be a reality. Um, yeah, I don't know. Holy shit, man!
what
Like,
about you, Josh? Anything? You wouldn't be 32 quite yet, but on your timeline,
Uh, I mean, technically, if everything goes to plan, right? I go back to school this
Mhm.
year. It's a 2-year program, 1 year uh articling internship. So that's
Mhm.
3. And the next 2 would be me coming back and then finding a job, right? Like that's like
That's the goal,
that's
the
the
dream.
goal. And then somewhere in between, not be single.
Not be
Not
single.
be single. We'll see how it goes.
classic.
But
Classic.
that also brings up like I know I mentioned this to you, Sar, but like uh one of our other friends was like complaining about their classmate
Mhm.
and saying like, "Oh, they're almost 30, like they should be a dad by now. Like why is he like not doing their homework?"
I'm mistaken.
Yeah. No, but I was just then like that got me thinking like, number one, we're almost 20 or 30. Like we're not dads, but
Mhm.
do you think being 30 gives us like more expectations on like, oh, you're 30, like you should technically have these milestones or something like that happen already?
I think I don't know exactly what generation, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles kind of have expectation. Also because I don't meet with many of them many days of the year, so I wouldn't know from that perspective. Maybe you guys have a little bit different view, but I think for me, expectations might arise from a longer relationship. If you've been in a relationship for a while, then maybe some sort of expectations arise then. Um, but I think society as a whole is moving towards the number. Just hitting 30 doesn't mean anything, but simultaneously, it's a round number. I don't know if you guys know this, but this one I do know the claim is true that most marathon runners are like 19, 29, 39, 49 compared to the other ages in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Because before the round number hits, people are like, damn, what have I been doing these last 10 years? Like I gotta get my ass into gear.
Mhm.
So I think because humans love round numbers, love their tens,
Yeah.
the 30 does come with some expectations, but I think in society it's much softer expectations than maybe when we were kids from a 30-year-old, especially, pandemic,
Mhm.
economy, all the good stuff that's affecting us now as adults
Yeah.
definitely have tempered the expectations society and family are expecting from us. And I think to me, it kind of just matters how, like, if you have a 5-year goal, like, good on you. Nothing against the people who do or don't. But I don't think that just the age will is a big determiner. When that person, when we were talking in the car, and that person hit like, "Oh yeah, this person should be a dad, not in school." I'm like, mind blown by that take almost. Since when I started uni, I was pretty shy. I wouldn't, but the people who would talk to me typically were the older students. I
Yeah.
typically was hanging out with married people. I didn't know they were married initially, but it's like I was just like study buddy or whatever, and it's like, oh, this
Mhm.
person's like 28, 27, 29. I'm like, oh, like why am I only talking to the adults? I'm like 17 years old, 18 years old, so um, I don't think people, and that was nearly a decade ago now. I don't think those
Wow.
people.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
sorry to hit you there, um, but I don't think being an age should affect your what you're doing in life, I
Yeah.
guess.
I mean, and I think especially now, we are moving to like, yeah, having fewer expectations for, for things at certain ages, especially with our
Hmm.
generation. Because like, I don't know, like even my parents, like, and I think for like our parents' generation, my parents actually had me kind of like, I guess, middle or late, depending on like what you would say, because like,
Mm,
I don't know, my mom had me when she was 31.
mm,
I know some people like amongst our friends whose parents had them when they were like 23, right? So
mm.
like I feel like the parents' generation there was definitely a lot of expectations like, oh yeah, yeah. You gotta, start a family very early on and, get a house and like settle in and like do all these things
I think it's
by like age 30.
I think it's really culturally as well, right? My parents,
Yeah.
I don't think were necessarily late, but where they grew up, you don't really get to start living your own life until you're already in your mid 20s.
Yes,
Someone being
that
a
is
parent
true.
in 23 is typically ultra religious, or an exception to the rule where people
Yeah.
only kind of starting to think about it, or settling down around a few years younger than us, or around our age now. So my
Yeah.
parents had me and my sister at 30, So, and we're
Okay.
the first set. So
Yeah.
it's, and I think compared like my cousins' ages as well, like my aunts and uncles when they had them is similar, if not older. So
Mhm.
they, for me, I guess I have less, or I'm comparing to my parents, right? That's what I know.
Mhm.
And sure, there's things they've done when they were younger than me, things they have done when they were older that they did it, but I guess that that timeline, I'm still in it.
Yeah. Okay. So that to me is also interesting because like theoretically, yeah,
Mhm.
if if I am on the same timeline as my parents,
Yeah.
in 5 years my first kid would be born,
Hmm.
right? So
Time's
kind
ticking,
of
bro.
again, yeah, like coming back to the 5 year plan, that's like I don't know, that's kind of bonkers to think about. We had this talk like a while ago as well about like having kids, and that's not really the topic that we're on now,
Hmm.
but it's always kind of terrifying to be like, yeah, I still feel like a kid, and I know like a lot of people will be talking about, oh yeah, like when you become a parent, you just kind of become a parent, and you like
Hmm.
and you do all these things. But in terms of like feeling old and growing old, like I don't feel particularly old, you know?
You know, I
Um,
heard a terrifying thing where you don't actually ever feel old, and our
yeah,
parents feel young as well, but you're like, nah, you're old, you're my dad, you're my mom, right? But they're like, no,
yeah,
they feel as young as they were like 20 years ago, 30 years
yeah,
ago.
like
They're just growing up.
you always just
Hmm.
feel yourself, right? And
Yeah.
so like I mean, kind of in the grand scheme of things, again, like when you're comparing directly, yeah, like I may feel older than some of, some of my friends who were born later in the year, like things like that, or like
Hmm.
collectively we may joke about, oh yeah, like I'm old, right? I'm
Hmm.
the old man, but I don't feel particularly, you know, sure there's some like physical things. I'm not like in my physical prime anymore. I'm not like, you know, I don't know, ripping off PRs every day and shit like that.
You
But
could be.
yeah, you know what? I can build back up to that. I could,
Go on a
but
cycle.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, like mentally, I feel, sharp. I'm not
Mm.
old. I feel the same that I've always felt mentally. Like, no, I'm just me.
Mm.
That is what it is. But again, like you were talking about the round numbers, though, it is like it's daunting thinking about that.
Mm.
Like a lot of people do ascribe a lot of significance to these numbers, um, and like there is some biological backing to like, oh yeah, the later you have kids, like, or the later you start trying to have kids, the more difficult it is, and things like
Yeah.
that. Um, you know, I mean, that's not an issue for any of the three of us, but more for women. But yeah, like in 3 years from tomorrow, I'm gonna be 30. Like that's so wild to think about.
3 years from today, you're still not 30.
Yeah, that's true. I think it spooks my parents a lot too. But every time I bring that up to my mom, I'm like, yeah, hey mom, in like 3 years I'm gonna be 30. What do you think about that? And she's God.
Why are you doing
Like,
this?
yeah. I can't believe I've known you for 30 years, like type of deal. Like,
Yeah,
your parents
I read a comment where it was like, "Oh, why is it whenever you haven't seen a family member in a while, the first thing they say is like, look how much you've grown, especially in your younger years. We're not growing too much now, maybe horizontally, but they're like, oh, how much you've grown?" And you're like, oh, why are they always hitting that? Like, oh, it's actually the family members. You're the representation of time passing because the last time they saw you, you were small. Now you're
yeah.
bigger, and it's just like physically seeing their age, like
Mhm.
the time moving, and that's why you're kind of hitting your mom with a similar
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because like that's honestly a stark contrast with like what you're saying, like because you guys mentioned earlier, like every day you're still feeling like yourself. Every day you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh, you know, nothing's really changed.
Nothing's changed.
And
Yeah.
you see like a younger cousin or something, and they're like taller than you,
Mm-hmm.
like only like 18 or 17. You're like, the heck? It's just jarring.
Yeah, that's spectacularly terrifying. I called in, and this kind of ties back to episode one, right? So my family had their Chinese New Year dinner with like all the people. I called in. I'm like, oh yeah, like seeing all my like very young cousins, significant others. It's like that's super weird. Like Grace's brother's girlfriend came by the house when we were like celebrating stuff out there with her parents, and like I'm sure it's weird for Grace and like for her parents to think about that too, and just like see, this is like her baby brother, right? Like almost 10 years younger, and like now they're growing up. Um, ah, Man, it's just like it's so bizarre to yeah. It kind of ties like right back in exactly with what you were saying, Sark. It's like for me, yeah, like I don't feel like I've changed. But I'm sure anyone older than me who's seen me grow up thinks that. And then, yeah, as I see everyone who was younger than me now grown up, that change is so real. It's like so concrete.
Yeah. Exactly.
Been
Yeah,
about half an
I'm,
hour.
yeah, sorry. I just have like one last thing to say
Yeah.
about
Mm.
getting older, I guess. It's like, I think the one thing that is really nice about getting older, and especially it has been throughout our 20s, is that I feel like honestly every year I get older, I get closer with my friends. And like that's I feel like that's something kind of obvious to say where like yeah, every year your friends, like I feel like you get closer, but even doing things like this and the types of conversations that we've had over the years, and again we kind of touched on this a little bit in I don't remember if it was the first or second episode, but um we have begun having a lot, I feel as if more thoughtful conversations and deeper conversations as we've grown older. And as a friend group, we've kind of matured together, which is like really, I don't know, that's something that I really appreciate kind of about getting older. It feels as if we're no longer talking about just kid stuff. We deal with getting older together, and I don't know,
Adult stuff.
it's kind of nice.
No, I totally agree. It's also just nice like to see like generally we have all the same like worldviews and opinions and stuff, but it's still nice to bounce ideas or like when someone like hard disagrees with something we do or say,
Hot takes.
hot takes or whatever, or even like stuff more serious. It's just interesting and I guess a learning experience that we're allowed to have these conversations and still be friends.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure.
Anything else?
All right, well,
Sorry.
See you after the break.
Yeah.
yeah. All right,
Hopefully it won't be
let's
as
take a break.
dark.
Yeah, we'll come back with a lighter topic after.
Yeah. We're back from the break. Kind of tying in to the discussion we had a little bit before, but discussing languages. We had a little touch on it in the travel discussion last episode, but there's so much to talk about for languages, I feel. We all speak at least 1.5 languages, if not more, here. But Tyler said you had a story you wanted to get out of the way.
Yeah. So over the weekend, I went to eat dim sum,
Mm.
and I would never tell people that I speak Chinese because I'm so unconfident in my Chinese that like I just can't, I could not say that I speak it. I can say usually that I can understand Chinese if it's spoken to me, like well, okay, so specifically Cantonese. So if someone was speaking to me, I could understand what they were saying, but my brain can't synthesize back anything until like I'm spoken to. Like if someone would just be like, "Oh yeah, like speak Chinese to me," I'd be like, "I can't do that. Like that's not how it works. My brain can't put those words sounds until someone's already speaking to me, and like then I can kind of integrate into that conversation. So, anyways, at the dim sum restaurant, usually when I go to Chinese restaurants these days with Grace, they're Mandarin speaking, and so I rely heavily on her to do the communicating. But these people spoke Cantonese to us, and so like I kind of had to spring into action a little bit. Like again, the only times that I really speak Chinese are like at restaurants, pretty much. Um, but it's like it's kind of a nice reminder every once in a while that I can, in fact, get by in my quote unquote mother tongue.
Mm.
Like I feel oftentimes like I don't know disconnected, I guess, from the heritage a little bit because I don't like outright speak the language. And it's nice just to kind of have that reminder that yeah, you know what, like I do have that ability to communicate with my people. I can speak this language if absolutely necessary. I can get by. But yeah, that was like my weekend experience was being
Yeah,
Cantonese. I managed to order and get all the dishes we needed
that's
at
good.
dim sum. Yeah.
Gotta get that weekly practice. So you think your quote unquote mother language as a kid what was kind of the first language where you taught like one at home, one at school, or what was your
No. So for me, we always spoke English. Like my parents are
mm,
both trilingual. They speak English, Cantonese, and Malay
mm,
growing up in Malaysia. Um, but then because we came to Canada, like they came to Canada and then I was born here, they never saw the need to teach me any other languages besides English. Because
mm,
like an English speaking country, they're
yeah,
both fluent in English. Why wouldn't they just talk to their kid in English? So I grew up exclusively speaking English in the house. And like my dad grew up in England for like most of his life.
yeah,
Just as like his early childhood was in Malaysia, but like from age 9 until he was 24, he lived in England, right? So he had been using English his entire life. Um, so the only time I would get to listen to or speak Chinese was when they were talking to the generation above them or other Chinese speakers. So I was never taught how to speak Chinese. I never even spoke Chinese at home at all. So like that's why I kind of say no, like I don't really speak Chinese. Like I never
formal
took Chinese
education.
lessons.
Yeah,
Yeah, I never went to Chinese school like other kids do. I never was spoken to at home in Chinese, but you know, my family is Chinese and like that is my heritage. So that's like why it's quote unquote my mother tongue, right? It's like my family's history is there, but I was just never taught that.
mm. Josh, what about you and your parents as well? Like, were your parents moved here, right?
Yeah, so they immigrated like uh I would say 1990s maybe
Mm-hmm.
um from Hong Kong. So they spoke majority Cantonese, but they did like work with like some other like international companies in Hong Kong. So
Mm,
they they had some kind of understanding of like English plus like they are taught that because Hong Kong was still like a British colony back then, right? So in terms of like languages I grew up with, I would definitely say Cantonese is like my first one, but it was like really strange because when I entered like preschool and kindergarten, it was in English. So I just absorbed the language and I kind of spoke that at home instead, which then prompted my parents to be like, oh, there's something wrong with our kid. He's not speaking like Chinese anymore. So they bought me like a ton of um Chinese cartoons, literally, or like
yeah,
whatever for me to watch. And
Chinese
like they're like I got into them because they were funny and entertaining.
yeah.
So I started speaking Cantonese more at home. Plus, like that was the only language my grandma spoke, and she lived with us, so I had to kind of keep on that. And obviously, like other Chinese kids, I went to Chinese school, blah blah blah, blah. Hated the crap out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that is Chinese food like once a week, right? Like on the
hmm
weekend or whatnot? Mhm.
Chinese school usually, if it's not the Saturday like weekend stuff, it's right after regular school. So like 4 o'clock to 5 or something.
Were you put in ESL because you're technically like your speaking language at home wasn't English?
Yeah. So I was in ESL, but like I'm pretty sure I was fluent in English at that point. It was just, speaking language at home and last name and all that. Little casual racism,
Yeah.
probably.
What about you, kind of like? I feel
Oh,
you wouldn't
I was
have. Okay.
put into ESL. They like very quickly realized that I don't even speak any other languages.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it was kind of like, nope,
Feel like
English is my only
maybe.
language, let alone my second language, right? So
Mm,
yeah, they didn't even put me in there at all.
mhm. I, mm, so I immigrated here, so obviously English wasn't my first language. I
Yeah.
remember preparing to come to Canada. I went to like this after school program. My younger siblings were like 1 years old, so they were obviously not speaking any language. But
Mhm.
I was five and a bit, so I learned the Head and Shoulder Knees and Toes song. Like that's a nostalgic core memory.
Oh
Like
yeah.
some of the first words I learned, you know, in English were the body parts from that song. Um, I honestly couldn't tell you anything else that I learned from there, but that song stuck. That song, I got the face,
Nice.
the body parts, those are on lock. Um, and then when I came to Canada, my parents were giga strict about no English at home. Uh,
Oh,
they, in uh, like most countries in the world, by then, had English as a if English wasn't the primary language, you learned it in school for a
yep.
few years at least. They're no different. They had their companies typically worked with international divisions of their companies as well. So sometimes they'd have to interact with maybe someone from Germany, but they don't know German and the other people don't know Hebrew, so the common language is English. So everyone's speaking broken English to one another, but everyone knows what's up at the end of the day. You make it work.
Mhm.
Um, I took some linguistics classes because I find that interesting, but we're gonna digress a little too hard if I get into that. But yeah, people make things work when they need to communicate with one another. That's a very
Yeah.
cool part of human history. Um, but so when we came over, it's like, oh yeah, I'm getting absolutely roasted. I don't know if I swear I mentioned this to someone, but I remember first month in, I'm watching Powerpuff Girls on TV. I can still remember. It's me and my sister were watching on the TV. It's like small black. What are those old huge
CRT?
TVs called? CRT.
CRT? Yeah.
Yeah, and we're like raising it up to hear like the sound effect and stuff. And my dad's like, "Why are you raising the volume? Like you don't understand shit." Like I'm like, I know, but first of all, I didn't know I could put this for my rebuttal at age 6, but it actually helps picking up. Consuming media does help you pick up languages, but
Yeah.
I obviously didn't have that in my back pocket then. But it's just there for the sound effects anyway. But that's a little fun anecdote. But yeah, there's no English at home because my parents really want us to keep the language,
Mhm.
and uh, my siblings, didn't go to elementary even in Israel, but my parents, bought the workbooks or like notebooks, the letters.
Mhm.
Um, we're speaking at home. My parents were. I remember, uh, in French class. Yeah, I did French immersion, right? So they'd be like, no English in class. You want to work French only. Is like, if only it was that strict. If the strictness was the same household strictness that I had, I would be perma speaking French in French class. Let's say that.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, I it worked. Anytime I go back, everyone's like, "Wow, you're fluent." Like you speak.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even be able to tell. We don't have
How's
an
it, how's it now in your house though? Like now that you guys are
Yeah.
grown
So
up.
time's going by, as you can tell with everyone who, relating to our previous topic grows up, you get a little softer, you get a little rounded edges. So there's definitely English. If I'm talking to my siblings, especially,
Mhm.
unless there's a reason to, I'll probably speak in English to them. If there's some lads around and I want to get a message across just to them, it's Hebrew,
Yeah.
code language in there. But Um, siblings, it's primarily. I don't know if you guys know the term code switching. It's
Yep.
you. It's primarily. It's used to describe that how you change how you talk depending on who you're with.
Yeah.
another use for it. I even wrote a paper on this in uni where uh, if you're like multilingual, like families or schools or whatnot, and you hear someone on the phone, they're speaking in some language you don't know, and then they say downtown, you're like, oh, like that's a good example of it. So that happens as well, even with my parents now, where you know now my discussion with my parents, kind of back to your point, is it'll be almost 50-50, or not 50-50, like 30 English, 70 Hebrew. They'll start a conversation in Hebrew. Might, swap a sentence here, swap a sentence there. Sometimes some topics, are Hebrew only. Some topics are primarily English. It's just really depending on the context and what's happening, which I think is pretty cool. It obviously, with more English means less Hebrew, means less Hebrew practice. Though, if I'm speaking to any family members, they know English the way we know French, or French, I guess, and so it's just Hebrew only because my level is nearly as good, or it's not as good as theirs. Obviously, there's words I still don't know. I make grammatical mistakes here and there, but it's fluent, so it's
Yeah.
a non-issue there. And I think because they were so strict, my siblings technically never did schooling. Not technically, they never did schooling in Hebrew, but because my mom was so kind of adamant that they keep that language,
Yeah.
my reading formal education stopped at most of grade 1, so my reading skills are pretty doo-doo. They do work though, but my siblings is even like further back there. It's slow and steady. You uh, so you can kind of see the differences
Yep.
between that. But I think if I haven't thought about it. I have thought about this. I would know what I do if I grow up. Would I teach my kids Hebrew? I think it really depend on with who, where, when, what. Like so many factors would come into play for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of surprised almost that your parents were like, "Oh, we both." If it's a language just one parent spoke, then I think the argument against is stronger. But if both parents speak it, especially kind of seeing the tools that it brings to you, it literally can't hurt. Kids have insane brain plasticity. They pick up languages
Yeah.
so fast.
So okay, so for me, okay, and actually, I'm going to touch back to something you said
Sure.
after this,
Yeah,
but
speaking.
I think for me, it's because my parents spoke to each other in English, right? Like my parents wouldn't even speak Chinese to each other, and so that's why it wasn't the language that they spoke to me in, right? They would only speak Chinese to, again, the older generation, or like people who didn't speak English and things like that. But again, like my mom moved here. We touched on this, I think, in the first episode too. My mom moved here when she was in grade 6, so she was here from like age 12 onwards. So she did her whole high school in English, her whole university in English. My dad went to boarding school in England from age 9, so he was always speaking English as well.
Too, yeah.
And so when they met, like even though they both could speak all 3 languages, having kind of a similar, childhood, the language that they were both speaking at the time was English. And so that's the language that they spoke to each other in, and that's why I think it's the language that they always had spoken to me in, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But now, kind of touching back on the reading writing thing, I think that this is like a big kind of sticking point, especially with Chinese people. So, like, Josh, can you read and write in Chinese?
To a certain extent, like I feel like
Yeah.
if you gave me like 100 words,
like pull out the newspaper,
I would be able to read 70% of it.
Okay.
I feel like that's pretty good. I cannot read it or write like at all. I can barely write my own name in Chinese.
Let's just say I can read everything on the dim sum menu if I went.
Yeah,
that's the important part.
Okay.
Well, I don't need dim sum, so it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, but like I could not read anything on the menu. I just have to communicate verbally. Like if one of them like gave me a menu like yeah, I can read the English and like say the Chinese
Uh-huh.
equivalent, but if the menu is all in Chinese, I would not be able to read it at all. I would just have to say, "Oh yeah, I want this, this, and this," or like, "Do you have this?" And
Mhm.
then point to it on the menu and be like, "Yeah, we have this in Unity." I'd be like, "Oh, sorry, like I can't read, but like
Yeah.
I can speak sort of." So I just think that like that is a really interesting immigrant experience with languages, where I feel like a lot of the kids will be able to speak fluently, but perhaps not read or write fluently, because of the virtue that they grew up here or went to school here, right? And so speaking, yeah, you use that every day, right? You can talk to your parents all the time. It's the
Mhm.
language you use at home, but it may not necessarily be the language that you read or write in ever. And so I think that, again, unless you're going to like Chinese school or you're going to a language school, that's not a skill that you're practicing often enough for it to be fluent as if you were speaking. Um, like for Grace, she didn't like she grew up speaking Mandarin in the house all the time, but she had to teach herself how to like read, because that's not something that she ever did. Like she is able to read, um, and like I guess type, not necessarily write, but um, she's able to communicate in written because she taught that to herself. But that's not something she ever like learned from her parents.
Yeah, like you said, that there's so much more room to practice speaking because you're speaking to your parents, but you're not writing letters to your parents or even like family members. I do remember once we moved, I did write a letter or two, and then email came along, and then I kind of stopped writing. We just Skype because the technology was there now.
Mm.
Back in the day, the technology just wasn't there, so you'd write a letter, um, or make a phone call. But those
Yeah.
back in the day had long distance fees, which
Oh yeah.
not that they don't exist now, but there's much better ways around them, like the
Mhm.
internet. So yeah, really, I totally agree with that point where you just have way less practice to use the reading and writing skills, so they don't develop and either they stagnate or even like reduce because you just fall out of practice with them.
Yeah.
And it does feel like, yeah, you are missing something. Like, if I go to a place that language is uh, like everywhere and on the signs and menus and everything, it could hurt me. But you're primarily interacting with people. The speaking part is like the important part.
Mhm.
But I also wanted to touch about how I not just second generation, but I've even seen in some first generation, but I think you see it a lot more in second generation where the kids sometimes they don't get taught the language. So it's kind of like you're saying, where and you could understand the language a lot. And I've seen that in a lot of people where they understand their parents' first language, which
Yeah.
isn't English, but they but they'll reply in English. And I remember initially when I found out about that, I was like pretty young, so I was like, "Oh, that's bonkers to me. Just speak it, lol." But obviously, that's not how it goes. Um, but yeah, so that understanding is pretty cool too, though. Especially, it does kind of work the other way around, especially for older people like grandparents, where they'll understand the English, but they wouldn't speak it. So you're kind of
Yeah.
they're speaking one language to you, you're speaking one language back. Everyone understands what's going on, so no
Mhm.
problems there.
Yeah.
So communication problems, solved in that regard, which is cool. But um, obviously, you'd want to. I think knowing languages is pretty damn cool. Being able to talk to more people is pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. What compelled your parents to enroll you into French immersion?
So my mom was born in Belgium.
Okay.
My grandpa was from Egypt, but they were in kind of like richer sections, so they went to like the French school.
Okay.
So my mom's side all spoke French. Like my grandma, like my mom's mom, she was from Belgium.
Mhm.
She only immigrated after World War II. Um, with like just the
Yeah.
nuclear family that remained. But um, so she spoke French growing up, and I think it was kind of important for my mom. And like I touched on before, where kids can pick up languages pretty quickly,
Mhm.
then they're like, why not? Also, I think they're saying that the public school was it. They felt that their kids weren't weren't struggling enough. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but they could
Weren't
definitely
being
take on
challenged.
they
Yeah.
could take on the challenge. Yeah, that's a lot better way to put it. And so they enrolled us and my younger siblings as well. And I think yeah, it's only had net positives. I feel yeah. When I talked to my grandpa when he was still around, we communicated in French. That was it. Worked. That's even though
Mhm.
we both spoke Hebrew, and for the first 15 years of my life, I only spoke Hebrew to him and him to me. Afterwards, it's just like, oh, I know French, perfect. My grandpa's like back on the French tree. I was just like browsing some WhatsApp messages a while ago. It's like, yeah, just everything's in French. Uh, and like I touched before, when I go to France, like I have the skills there.
Mhm.
I was kind of thinking about it though. I think typically people's spoken language is a bit better because they have more room to practice it um, compared to their reading and writing. But I think learning it in school, there's a lot more reading and writing than there's speaking. So
Yeah.
I think either they're all equivalent or my speaking is even a little lacking. Obviously, I make fun of it sometimes, but I do have a little pronunciation problem with some things. Not crazy, but sometimes I'll definitely butcher a word. Um, butcher for the boys, but uh, yeah, that I think that's the primary reason. Just my mom's side had it, or
Yeah.
like spoke it, and then yeah, learning a language, especially the public school offering of French is substantially like less hardcore towards learning the language in my view. I didn't take it, but from the friends who were in English immersion, like it definitely didn't feel that the language pickup was as they picked it up as much. That makes sense.
Josh, would you enroll your kids into French immersion or like send them to Chinese school or
Never French immersion because I hate
Never
French.
French.
No, no, no.
Whoa.
I don't hate the French. I just hate
Mhm.
French. Or it's not like hate. I just there's no reason for me to use it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Chinese school, probably, maybe. I don't know. Like, there's so many things like I grew up with where like, yeah, I'll never put my kid through this.
yeah,
But
like
like
it was miserable.
sometimes like maybe it was good for them. Maybe it was good for me. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
back then, like piano lessons, trash. I don't want to be there. But like, I don't know. I like music now. And
Yeah.
like cuz I did Cantonese school at the beginning and then I shifted to Mandarin and then I hated Mandarin so I quit. I'm like, well, now Mandarin's a really important skill to have.
Mhm.
So why not equip my future children with skills that will benefit them,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. I was talking with Grace about this too. Like obviously she wants to speak to our kids in Mandarin and I can't speak Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
So our kids are gonna like out language me by a factor of like 4 to 1.
You can learn with them, bro.
I well I don't know, it's not really like learning, like she's just gonna that's how they're gonna communicate.
Learn
But
with them.
that's what she's told me. Well, but the kids don't really learn it, right? They just
Yeah.
like assimilate into it, right? And I can't just assimilate into it
Yes and no,
at that
because
point.
cutting off here a little bit, but my parents, came to Canada. Their English is, English used in a non-English speaking country enough to maybe talk to foreign coworkers or what they learned in high school, right? And I think they took post-secondary, so there's like an English course there too.
Yeah.
But their English then compared to even 5 years later, definitely compared to now, like other than an accent of not having grown up here for the first 20 years of their life, you their English is like fantastic. They're
Yeah.
so I would also say, obviously, they're fully immersed in a culture. English, you, I'm assuming, aren't going to China, but
No.
um, it's definitely pick upable. And obviously, I'm a little, not obviously, but I definitely think Duolingo is not the way to go about learning a language. I think
Yeah.
it's a great source to practice a language. Just
Mhm.
that like work on that vocabulary, like some words you never thought you need, but you definitely will. Um, uh, and just that weekly consistency really does help. But I think going using mobile apps to learn isn't a great tool. I think language schools, courses, and stuff like that. I also do think in person with someone who speaks to you and corrects you where you're wrong versus online resources is better. Obviously, not to say that online resources aren't good, but that mobile app practice consistency definitely could help you. You just sneak in once a week or something.
Mhm.
Just do one day, one gaming session where you're just speaking in Mandarin, and that's all good.
I mean, the
Yeah.
single best way to learn a language is immersion, right? Like
Mm.
Yeah.
that's pretty much proven. So, I mean, if your child household is gonna be in Mandarin, like who knows? It
I
might just
suppose.
you might
But
just
see,
switch.
that's 5 years in the future.
Yeah,
So like
no,
I need to tack on another X number of years after that to
yeah,
like
that's fair.
build that up. I suppose. Like
5 years gonna pass.
I feel like it's possible, but that's like yeah, I always thought that would be interesting. Like if my kids spoke languages that I couldn't speak.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really want to enroll my kids in Spanish schools to like have them learn Spanish from a young age. Because
Well, why Spanish?
they'll why Spanish?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Sorry.
So it's because um I read this like statistic that if you spoke English, Mandarin Chinese, and Spanish, you could get by speaking like a language that is commonly spoken in like 90% of the countries in the world, or like something like
Mm.
that. And so that ability is like insane to me. I feel like, and not to discount French, but there's a lot more Spanish speaking
Oh,
countries
definitely.
than French speaking countries. And so like if they know English, which they will, like by virtue of, that's something very valuable to me. And like I'm an English speaker. I love speaking English. Like that's gonna be my primary language of communication with them, and then Mandarin with Grace, and Grace's family. And then if we tack Spanish onto that, they'll be like, able to navigate the entirety of the globe pretty much, like
Mhm.
without exceptional difficulty. And I think that that's just something that's really, again, just like something that they would value later in life, perhaps not, as they're in the
Immediately.
midst of it, probably be like, why, like, the hell's my dad making me learn Spanish? Like, no one in our family like knows Spanish, but like,
Like we're
but
Chinese. Why do we need Spanish?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But that's just like it's like the missing piece,
yeah.
for them to be just like
The infinity
globe trotting.
languages. No, but
Yeah,
like those three languages would also make picking up similar languages also very easy, right?
yeah, I think so too. And
Not
that
easy, but
okay.
you know.
So for me, that's like kind of one of the reasons why I find it hard to learn Mandarin. Like every time I've tried to learn Mandarin, I'm like, I feel like I always end up mixing it up in my brain with Cantonese and Korean. So like the small amount of Korean I know from like taking Korean lessons in high school, um, now when I try to learn like any other sort of Asian languages, all like the words just end up being like, oh yeah, I'll just be speaking, and then like I'll flip in words from like all three languages, and it'll just be like, oh what, like that means literally nothing in any of them because it's like a combination of all of them. Um, so like that's I don't know, that's a difficulty that I have now in terms of trying to learn languages. It's like I just have that like it's already drilled in my brain that certain things are certain ways, right? Um, but yeah,
But
I
I
don't know.
feel sorry, like instead of just focusing on like Mandarin, I feel like if you go into Cantonese with like the intent of learning Chinese, it could also not like
Yeah,
rewire your brain, but just like help out on that sense. Because like
yeah,
even though I like the 3 4 years I took Mandarin, like I'm not retaining much, but like if I hear someone's like speaking, like I can make out a bit with my limited knowledge, right? So with you learning uh Cantonese and then being immersed in Mandarin, it might help that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of to round up the conversation here, similar to you saying, "Oh, my kids are gonna know a language I don't." My dad has that, right? Everyone but him speaks French.
Mhm.
You know, it's like no big deal. Like he still
That's good.
speaks English or Hebrew with us, and
Yeah.
in high school and uni he took Arabic. So the kind of way that I don't know
So he's a
Josh, I
plus
guess, has
one on you.
Mandarin. No, it's like there's like the little things he'll know like a word or some phrasing, right? In in 10 years' time, how much French do you think you're gonna remember from your high school days? Like not much, presume, or
Yeah.
whatever language you took.
Yeah.
But you definitely even had more practice in that than he has. But yeah, I don't think it's like such a big deal that your kids would speak another language you don't, right?
Oh yeah. I
So
don't think it's like a huge deal, but it's
yeah.
just kind of like that's kind of interesting to think about.
Mm.
All right. Well, uh, that's been our now third official episode of
Yeah.
the Up and Up podcast. Um, Thanks for tuning in once again. It's been great having you guys. Like for our first
Yeah.
few episodes, I know definitely people have been listening to it, which is super nice to hear, and we've been getting some good feedback on it. So we'll keep it up, and we'll see you all next week.
See ya.
Bye.